Terrifying Tales of the Midnight Drive. Welcome, brave viewers, to a chilling journey down the darkest roads of the unknown. In this spine-tingling video, we'll be sharing 4 bone-chilling tales that will make you think twice about your next late-night drive. From spectral hitchhikers to haunted highways, these stories are guaranteed to send shivers down your spine and leave you questioning the very nature of the roads we travel. So buckle up and get ready to embark on a journey filled with terror, as we dive into these 4 horrifying road stories that will haunt your nightmares. Viewer discretion is advised, as these tales are not for the faint of heart. Let's begin. Story 1: Eternal Passenger, a nightmarish drive with the hitchhiker. The night was dark and cold, with a dense fog settling over the desolate stretch of road I was driving on. I had always been a fan of the eerie, the mysterious, and the unexplained. It was the reason I found myself behind the wheel of my beat-up sedan, traversing a lonely road in the dead of night. My fascination with the supernatural had led me to seek out haunted places, but this was different. I wasn't searching for anything tonight, I was merely trying to get from point A to point B. My headlights barely cut through the thick mist, making it feel like I was navigating through a tunnel of shadows. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the engine, interrupted occasionally by the eerie screech of an owl. As I drove further into the abyss, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I squinted through the fog, my heart pounding. There, on the side of the road, was a figure. It was a woman, her hair long and disheveled, her tattered clothes barely clinging to her frail form. My initial instinct was to keep driving. I'd heard enough horror stories about hitchhikers being ghosts or worse, but something about her made me hesitate. She extended a shaky hand, her fingers reaching for a ride. I rolled down the window just a crack and asked, "Need a lift?" She nodded, her eyes piercing me with an intensity I couldn't quite place. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she said, "Thank you, kind stranger." She climbed into the back seat, her presence casting an unsettling chill throughout the car. Her clothes were soaked, and the smell of dampness and decay wafted from her. I swallowed hard, trying to hide my unease. "Where are you headed?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Home," she replied, her voice quivering. I peered into the rearview mirror, trying to get a better look at her. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes hollow and vacant. She looked like she had been through hell and back. "Where's home?" I pressed, my curiosity overpowering my fear. She directed me with vague instructions, and I reluctantly followed the path she outlined. The fog grew thicker, and the road seemed to twist and turn in unnatural ways. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As we drove deeper into the night, the woman remained eerily silent. I tried to make small talk, but her responses were brief, and she seemed lost in her thoughts. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping over me. Then, as we approached a decrepit bridge that seemed to lead to nowhere, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Stop the car!" I hit the brakes, bringing the sedan to a screeching halt. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the desolate bridge, shrouded in fog and darkness. "Why here?" I stammered. "This is where I died," she whispered, her voice quivering. I turned to look at her, my blood running cold. "What do you mean?" She slowly turned her head to meet my gaze, her eyes filled with an unspoken sorrow. "I was a hitchhiker like you once, a long time ago. I trusted the wrong person, and it cost me my life. Now I wander these roads, searching for a way home." My hands trembled on the steering wheel as her words sank in. I had picked up a hitchhiker who wasn't just any hitchhiker, she was a restless spirit. My heart raced as I realized the gravity of the situation. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I need your help," she said, her eyes pleading. "I need you to take me home so I can finally rest in peace." I glanced out the windshield at the eerie bridge, then back at the ghostly hitchhiker. The weight of her request hung heavily in the air. Reluctantly, I nodded. "Okay, I'll take you home." As I eased the car onto the bridge, a bone-chilling wind swept through the car, extinguishing the headlights. Panic welled up inside me as the darkness closed in around us. The woman's form in the rearview mirror began to fade, her figure becoming translucent. "What's happening?" I cried out. "You're crossing over," she said, her voice distant. "Thank you for helping me." And then, with a final haunting smile, she vanished completely, leaving me alone in the darkness. I sat there, trembling, as the fog cleared and the headlights flickered back to life. The bridge stretched ahead, leading to a seemingly normal road on the other side. It was as if the encounter had never happened. I continued to drive, shaken to my core. I had glimpsed a world beyond the realm of the living, and I had played a role in helping a lost soul find her way home. As the first rays of dawn began to break, I couldn't help but wonder if it had all been a dream. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. From that day on, I never picked up another hitchhiker, and I never ventured onto that road again. The memory of that fateful night haunted my dreams, a reminder that sometimes the darkness of the unknown can seep into our reality. The fog. The moon hung low in the night sky, casting a pale, eerie glow on the empty highway ahead. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and the hum of the engine was the only sound in the car. I had always enjoyed late-night drives, finding solace in the solitude of the road. But on this particular night, that solitude was shattered by an unforeseen terror. I had been driving for hours, the monotony of the road hypnotizing me as I pushed deeper into the darkness. The radio had long since lost its signal, leaving me with only the sound of my own thoughts for company. My destination was still hours away, and the reason for my late-night journey weighed heavily on my mind. I was rushing to reach the hospital where my father lay critically ill. The late-night call had come like a bolt from the blue, jolting me from my peaceful slumber. My heart raced as I'd listened to the doctor's words, urging me to come quickly if I wanted to say goodbye. Panic and urgency drove me to the car, and I sped away from my home, leaving behind all thoughts of safety and rest. The highway stretched on endlessly, and fatigue was beginning to set in. I fought to stay awake, rolling down the windows to let the cool night air slap me awake. Each passing mile marker felt like an eternity, and the weight of impending loss hung heavily on my shoulders. As the miles passed by, a dense fog began to roll in. It crept across the road, reducing visibility to a mere few feet. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield in an attempt to navigate the thick mist. The road seemed to stretch on forever, disappearing into an abyss of white. My eyes were heavy, and my concentration wavered. I knew I needed to find a rest stop soon, but there was no sign of civilization in any direction. Panic started to creep in as the fog grew denser, swallowing the road whole. I considered pulling over and waiting it out, but the idea of being stranded in the middle of nowhere was equally unsettling. Just as I was about to make a decision, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, piercing through the fog. Relief washed over me as a large truck pulled up behind me, its horn blaring to get my attention. I signaled, and the truck driver passed me, taking the lead. I followed closely behind, grateful for the guide through the fog. The truck's taillights were like beacons, cutting a path through the thick mist. For a while I felt safer, knowing I wasn't alone on this desolate road. But as we continued, something strange began to happen. The fog seemed to grow thicker and more suffocating with every passing minute. I had to strain to keep the truck in sight, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. Then, without warning, the truck's brake lights flashed and it came to an abrupt stop. I slammed on my own brakes, narrowly avoiding a collision. The suddenness of it left me breathless, heart pounding in my chest. I watched as the truck's driver's side door swung open and a figure emerged, waving frantically for me to stop. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to drive away, but concern for the driver's safety overrode my fear. I killed the engine and stepped out of my car. The cold fog enveloping me like a shroud, the truck driver, a burly man in his 40s, approached me with a look of urgency. "You need to turn around," he said, his voice trembling. "Why? What's going on?" I asked, my anxiety mounting. He glanced back at his truck, then leaned in closer to whisper, "There's something out here in the fog. Something unnatural. I've never seen anything like it. It's not safe to go any further." I looked at him like he had lost his mind, and I was about to say screw it and drive off, but the look of sure terror in his eyes told me that he was not kidding, and if I kept going, I would not make it to the other side of the road. The fog clung to us like a malevolent presence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My heart raced as I realized just how perilous our situation had become. What was lurking out there, hidden in the thick mist? We drove in silence, the fear palpable in the air. It seemed like an eternity before we finally emerged from the fog, back onto a clear stretch of road. I pulled over and thanked the truck driver again, but he didn't stick around. He simply nodded and drove off into the night, disappearing into the distance. I continued my journey, shaken to my core. The fog was behind me now, but the memory of that night would haunt me forever. I had ventured into the unknown, and it had gone terribly wrong. The road, once a source of solace, had become a place of unseen peril, a reminder that in the darkness, the world can be a terrifying and unpredictable place. As I finally reached my destination, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. But I didn't rest easy, knowing that there is a malevolent force haunting the road, waiting for people to enter its clutches. The malevolent hitchhiker. The night was a velvety cloak, concealing the world's secrets. I was driving along a desolate stretch of highway, my mind foggy with exhaustion. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but an empty road ahead. My destination was still a few hours away, and the road stretched on endlessly. As I drove, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Maybe it was the late hour, or the solitude of the road that gnawed at my nerves. My eyelids were heavy, and I fought to stay awake. That's when I saw him, a lone figure standing on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. I approached cautiously, slowing down as I neared the hitchhiker. He was a tall, lanky man with disheveled hair and a tattered coat that barely shielded him from the cold night air. His face was obscured in shadows, making it impossible to discern his features. Instinct told me to keep driving, to ignore the stranger in the night, but my exhaustion and the isolation of the road clouded my judgment. I pulled over, the engine idling, and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked, my voice quivering slightly. The hitchhiker's head tilted up, his eyes hidden beneath a mop of hair. He didn't say a word. Instead, he nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. The scent of dampness and something more sinister filled the car as he settled in. "Thanks for stopping," he muttered, his voice low and raspy. I tried to make small talk, asking him about his destination, but his responses were curt, and he seemed disinterested in conversation. An eerie silence filled the car, broken only by the faint hum of the engine and the occasional sigh from the hitchhiker. As minutes turned into miles, I began to regret my decision. The man's presence was unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to make out his face in the dim light, but he remained shrouded in darkness. Then, he suddenly turned to me, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "Could you do me a favor?" he asked, his voice dripping with an eerie charm. "What kind of favor?" I stammered, my heart racing. "I need to make a quick stop," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Just a detour off the highway, it won't take long." My instinct screamed at me to refuse, to drive on and leave this unsettling stranger behind, but something in his gaze held me captive, and I found myself nodding in agreement. He directed me down a narrow, winding road that seemed to lead deep into the woods. The path grew darker and more treacherous with each turn, and a growing sense of dread settled over me. I wanted to turn back, but I was in too deep now. Finally, he instructed me to pull over by the side of the road, where the trees closed in like silent witnesses to our presence. He got out of the car and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone with my anxiety. Minutes turned into an agonizing wait, and I was on the verge of panic when he finally returned. He had something in his hands, something wrapped in a blood-stained cloth. "What is that?" I asked, my voice quivering. "Just a little souvenir," he said with a twisted grin. I could no longer ignore the danger that lurked in this car. I had to get out, had to escape from this nightmare. But as I reached for the door handle, his hand shot out, gripping my wrist with a strength that was otherworldly. His eyes, now gleaming with malevolence, bore into mine. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed. With a surge of adrenaline, I yanked my wrist free and flung open the door. I stumbled out of the car, my heart pounding, and ran into the woods, away from the hitchhiker and whatever horror he carried with him. I ran through the darkness, branches tearing at my clothes, thorns cutting into my skin. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of shadows and fear. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled onto the main road. I flagged down a passing car, my breath ragged, and told them what had happened. They called the police, who arrived on the scene, but the hitchhiker was long gone, leaving behind only a trail of dread and uncertainty. As I sat in the police car, recounting my harrowing ordeal, I couldn't help but wonder about the true nature of the hitchhiker I had picked up. What horrors had he carried in that blood-stained cloth? And what would have happened to me if I hadn't escaped? The road, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, had become a nightmare. It was a stark reminder that in the darkness of the night, danger could be lurking just around the corner, and the strangers we meet on the road may not always be what they seem. The desolate town's sinister secret. The road stretched out before me, disappearing into the horizon as I drove through the desolate landscape. It was a solo road trip I had embarked on to clear my mind, a journey of self-discovery. I had no specific destination. I was simply going wherever the road took me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by vast, empty fields. The only sound was the gentle hum of my car's engine and the occasional rustle of the wind. It was a lonely and tranquil setting, the kind that made you feel like you were the last person on Earth. But then, as I continued down the winding road, I noticed something unusual on the horizon. A cluster of buildings appeared, like a ghost town rising from the earth. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to pull over and explore this forgotten place. The town was eerie, frozen in time. Buildings stood in various states of disrepair, their paint faded and windows shattered. Weeds grew through cracks in the sidewalks, reclaiming the once bustling streets. It was as if the town had been abandoned overnight, leaving behind a haunting sense of emptiness. I parked my car by the side of the road and stepped out, the silence of the town enveloping me. There was a strange feeling in the air, a sense that I was being watched, but I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. I wandered through the town, exploring the crumbling facades of shops and homes. Each step I took echoed through the empty streets, a stark reminder of the town's long-forgotten past. The sun had fully set by now, and darkness settled over the town like a shroud. As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated house. It stood apart from the others, its windows boarded up and its front door ajar. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I hesitated before cautiously pushing the door open. Inside, the house was a maze of decaying furniture and peeling wallpaper. Dust hung in the air like a thick fog, making it hard to breathe. It was clear that no one had lived here for years, yet the sense of being watched persisted. I continued to explore, my footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. It was when I reached the basement that I felt a sudden, chilling presence behind me. I turned, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just an old, cracked mirror on the wall. But in that mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, tall and shadowy, stood behind me, its eyes gleaming with malice. I whirled around, but there was no one there. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The feeling of being watched was no longer a mere sensation. It was a terrifying reality. I needed to leave this place, to get as far away from the abandoned town as possible. I rushed back up the creaking stairs and out of the house, my footsteps echoing through the empty streets. But as I reached my car, I realized that something was horribly wrong. The town had changed. The buildings that were once crumbling had been restored to their former glory, their windows now intact, their paint fresh. Panic set in as I fumbled for my car keys. The town was no longer abandoned, it was alive, and it had sinister intentions. I could feel eyes on me from every direction, unseen entities watching my every move. I finally managed to start the car and peeled out of the town, my tires screeching on the pavement. As I sped away, I could see figures in the windows of the houses, their eyes following me with malevolent intent. As I sped away from the abandoned town, the reflection in the mirror showed a distorted, nightmarish version of the road behind me. It was as though I had entered a nightmarish realm, a twisted, parallel dimension. The road behind me was now a nightmarish landscape with gnarled, skeletal trees lining the highway. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an unnatural, blood-red glow. Shadows moved along the roadside, shapeless and malevolent. My heart raced as I realized that I was trapped in this nightmarish reflection, a prisoner in a world that defied all reason. I couldn't escape, no matter how fast I drove or how far I went. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, leading me deeper into this horrifying realm. As I drove, the sinister landscape began to change. The road twisted and contorted, leading me in impossible directions. The trees seemed to reach out for me, their branches like gnarled hands trying to ensnare me. The moon overhead grew larger and more ominous, casting a sickly pallor over everything. Then I saw them. Figures in the darkness, lurking at the edge of the road. They were tall and gaunt, their eyes gleaming with malevolence. I couldn't make out their features, but their presence filled me with dread. I tried to turn the car around, to escape this nightmare, but the road had become a labyrinth, a maze of winding paths that led me further into the abyss. The figures drew closer, their whispers of malice filling the car. Desperation gripped me as I realized that there was no way out. I was trapped in this nightmarish reflection, at the mercy of whatever malevolent force controlled it. I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. And now, there was no escape. The figures closed in, their bony fingers clawing at the car, their faces contorted with hunger. I could feel their icy breath on my neck, their presence suffocating me. And then, with a jolt, I woke up. I was back in my car, parked by the side of the road, the abandoned town in the distance. It was as though I had been trapped in a horrifying dream, a nightmare within a nightmare. My heart was still racing, and the feeling of being watched lingered, but I was free from the nightmarish reflection. I wasted no time in starting the car and driving away from the cursed town. As I left it behind, I couldn't help but wonder if what I had experienced was a glimpse into a malevolent dimension, a place where reality twisted and contorted, and the sinister secrets of the world beyond were laid bare. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never forget the desolate town and the nightmarish reflection it held. Some secrets are best left undisturbed, and some roads should never be travelled, for they lead to darkness and the horrors that lurk within.